Welcome to the Armidale Regional Council meeting of the 22nd of July, and I declare the meeting open. As Interim Administrator of Armidale Regional Council, I declare that I will undertake the duties of the Office of Interim Administrator in the best interests of our community and faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me to the best of my skill and judgment. Recognition of traditional owners. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The Armidale regional community pays tribute to their love of land, love of people and love of culture.
Thank you. Statement in relation to webcasting. The meeting is being audio and video recorded, and the recordings of the non-confidential parts of the meeting will be made available on the internet. No other persons are permitted to record the meeting unless specifically authorised by council to do so. In regards to have your say, all speakers are requested to ensure their comments are relevant to the particular agenda item. The chairperson may withdraw the privilege to speak where a speaker makes personal remarks or criticisms or uses abusive or inappropriate language. Speakers do not enjoy any special protection arising from comments made during council meetings and should therefore refrain from making defamatory remarks or personal defamatory statements against any individuals. We ask all those present to please ensure your mobile phones are turned off or silent.
Thank you. There's obviously no apologies or applications for leave of absence. Disclosures of interest, I don't have any. Do the staff have any? Public forum. This is my first time that I've seen how the public forum here works. I'd invite Mr. Basendorf, who wishes to speak in relation to item 13.4, level 5 water restrictions.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. It's Dr. Basendorf speaking here, and I'm speaking on that water issue, 13.4, I believe. First of all, I really have to commend the staff who prepared that report. It's, as one would expect, a very professional report, although I obviously disagree with some of the recommendations and conclusions. Let me start off by talking very briefly about Dubbo and 8 months ago, because 8 months ago, and I've got it here in the newspaper, Sydney Morning Herald of November last year, Dubbo Council treated this issue of water restrictions of going from level 2 to their level 4, and ultimately they did, but what they did do, and this was the council, and I'm talking about the elected council of course, they then tweaked the regulations, or the regulations that management had suggested to them. And I use the word tweaked because they weren't changing them drastically or throwing the baby out with the bathwater or anything like that. They were just merely tweaking it in response to community demands. And the main thing was, some handheld hoses or hosing was allowed and a few other things. I won't go into details because even though their dam was only 3%, it was probably larger than ours. The details are irrelevant and probably wouldn't apply to Armidale now, but I'm just giving this an example of somewhere where the council, and I mean the elected council, actually looked at the matter, and as it happened they changed it slightly, and as far as I know it's gone quite well. That's my first point. So elected council should make these sorts of decisions. That brings us now to the item, and as I said, it's a good report, but of course, in my view anyway, Mr. Administrator, the staff, much as I commend them and praise them often, that they're not there to make decisions, they're to make recommendations. Or to refer to what they said about Queen Victoria, I think, was to advise and consent. And consent, of course, to the Parliament. In this case, it would be the staff consenting to what the elected council, or in this case, of course, would be you, Mr. Administrator, decide. So I think it's a matter of procedure, and to my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this council, the previous council in the last 12 months, 18 months or whatever, has not ever formally discussed the matter of water restrictions. It should be level 5 in the drought management plan, etc. I won't go into detail, but of course the past is another country and they do things differently there. But I think it's high time that council, or in this case, well, yourself, Mr. Administrator, should look at it, rather than leaving it to the non-elected staff, due deference to their expertise. First of all, I noticed the 17.4 is in the for information section, which I think is really wrong in itself. It should be for a decision, because it's council who should make those decisions, not just be informed by, well-meaning management or council officers. And then it's up to council to decide what, if anything, to do with it. So I think, Mr. Administrator, the motion should be for council, in this case again yourself, to review it all, and that it may lead to changes or it may lead to no changes, but it should be council's decision, the elected council, or in this case yourself, Mr. Administrator. Now, I'll finish up on sort of what I would perhaps like to see, but that's just one of many ideas probably. I like the Goldilocks principle. It's either too much or too little, or of course just right. So I would like, perhaps the administrator working together with the staff and with public consultation, looking at it, and in view of fairly recent rains and 55% in Malpas Dam, etc., I would hope that council or yourself, Mr. Administrator, could see fit to actually ameliorate some of these restrictions, not throw it out totally, because that would be stupid and counterproductive, but to ameliorate it. And of course, you're quite entitled to say, we'll review this in 3 months or 4 months or by Christmas if water usage is higher than expected. So I would really hope that this matter will be taken up to the so-called elected level, but not the administrative level, and looked at with the view of perhaps tweaking at the edge or going from level 5 to level 4. Again, you'll probably get a number of different viewpoints on that. So let the debate begin. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I now invite Mr. Richardson, who also wishes to speak on the same matter.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator and staff, for allowing me to speak on item 13.4, level 5 water restrictions today. Dear Mr. Administrator, up until May last year, Armidale Regional Council had 2 drought management plans on their website. I've actually I've got them here. You may not have seen them, Mr. Administrator. That's the Armidale Jimeric Council 2005 plan, and that's the Guyra Drought Management Plan 2016. They were both on the website up until the beginning of last year. In accordance with the Armidale Jimeric Council Drought Management Plan, in March 2019, Armidale was put on level 1 water restrictions. This was the first time that this had happened since Malpas Dam was completed in 1970. On 23 April 2019, in accordance with the Guyra Drought Management Plan 2016, Guyra was put on level 3 water restrictions. So we were following it at this stage. On 20 May also on 23 April 2019, in accordance with the Guyra Drought Management Plan, not the Armidale Jimeric Drought Management Plan, Armidale was put on level 3 water restrictions. So it started getting a bit confusing at this stage. On 20 May 2019, it was announced that Armidale Regional Council would be going on to level 4 water restrictions. By this stage, we could only assume that this was in accordance with the Guyra Drought Management Plan. On 20 May, it was announced that Guyra would be going on to level 5 water restrictions, and seemingly by osmosis, Armidale was also on level 5 water restrictions. The Armidale Generic 2005 Drought Management Plan, the Guyra Drought Management Plan 2016, disappeared off the website at around this time. So seemingly the new level 5 water restrictions were based on the Guyra Drought Management Plan, although the triggers on that plan related to the Guyra storage dams, not Malpas Dam. It would seem that somewhere along the line, Armidale and Guyra were put on the same drought management plan, although this was never conveyed to the constituents of Armidale Regional Council, and the plan wasn't on the ARC website. It later came out that the information of the progressive water restrictions were decisions made by management and not taken to full council. Any communications coming out on the water restrictions were utterly confusing. However, one thing that the CEO and Mayor made very clear was that there was to be no outside watering except by lugging buckets of grey water from inside. The constituents of Armidale couldn't really understand what was going on. Yes, we knew that there was a worsening drought. However, we had been through many droughts since Malpas Dam was in place and never experienced water restrictions. What had changed? What most of us didn't know was that in around 2008, the Guyra Regional Council had approved the doubling in size of the Elm Street tomato factory. Up until then, the Guyra dams could cope with the large water consumption of the factory. However, once it was doubled in size, the dams could no longer cope, as they weren't accordingly increased in size to cater for the extra demand for water. Malpas Dam depends on the Guyra dams overflowing for it to fill, and for the last 10 years this has rarely happened because of the pressure on the Guyra dams have been under trying to supply the township of Guyra and the Elm Street tomato factory. It didn't seem that when Guyra and Armidale residents were put on such harsh water restrictions that the same applied to the tomato factory. However, it was virtually impossible to find this out from council. Up until 3 December 2019, there were no public meetings whatsoever on the water crisis. And even when council finally had one, it was a meeting which you had to apply to attend, and it was actually held in this room, so they weren't exactly opening it up to the wider public. It didn't seem, at that meeting I asked about the existence of a drought management plan and was told by the CEO that the two old plans were being harmonised. However, I'm really not sure what that means, and as far as I know, there is still no plan. In January this year, one councillor cited the lack of communication by the Mayor on the water issues as one reason for the vote of no confidence in him. The severity of the level 5 water restrictions wrought a terrible toll on gardens in Armidale and Guyra, and the health of the residents in as much as lugging buckets of 10-litre buckets of grey water and psychologically watching their gardens die. And this could have been lessened had there been communication and, for instance, an allowance for handheld watering for half an hour every second day between the hours of 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. In summary, the constituents of the Armidale Regional Council are happy to work with council on the water issue. However, on the basis that we know what's going on and can participate in the process, and on that, and the council considers reducing level 5 to level 4 water restrictions. Thank you very much, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you for your contribution. I have similar views in relation to one issue you both raised, which I'll deal with when we come to that matter. We now move to the minutes of the meetings of council held on the 24th of June 2020. I would move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on the 24th of June 2020 and the closed council meeting of the 24th of June 2020 be adopted, and declare that carried. I have an administrator's minute, which by necessity is quite long. There's only to take notes because I'll arrange for it to be distributed prior to the conclusion of the meeting. I wish to report on a number of matters that have occurred since the last council meeting, principally in order to start to improve council's communication with the Armidale Regional Council community. The CEO of the council, Ms Susan Law, submitted her resignation on 1 July and her last day with council is 31 July. This has been a difficult time for Ms Law and I wish her well with her future endeavours and thank her for her contribution. As required by law, I was consulted in the resignation of the General Manager, Organisational Development, Ms Kim Bryan, and she finished her employ on 17 July. Her contribution to the council is recognised. In future, the term CEO will not be used by the council and it will revert to the statutory and more appropriate title of General Manager. I've been able to obtain the services of an acting General Manager, Mr John Rayner, who is well known and highly respected in local government nationally. Mr Rayner cannot commence his duties until 24 August, as he is presently working as acting General Manager at Edward River Council. In the period between Miss Law's departure and Mr Rayner commencing, I have yet to make a determination who will be acting and have asked that delegations in that regard be listed at the extraordinary meeting of council to be held on 29 July. The appointment of a new General Manager will be one of the most important tasks that I will have to undertake during my term as Interim Administrator. I would be less than honest if I did not inform the ARC community that this will be a difficult assignment, as unfortunately council does not have a good reputation for General Manager longevity. It's also necessary to appoint a new Director, again a more appropriate description of a second level role. In my view, council needs an experienced local government professional, preferably from New South Wales, to lead it through what will continue to be an extremely difficult period with so many issues that need to be addressed, resulting from the dysfunction of the council. Having saw several expressions of interest, the council will be appointing local government management solutions from LG New South Wales to undertake the recruitment of both the General Manager and the Director. For over 25 years, this service has facilitated the recruitment of General Managers and Directors for a wide range of councils, from rural and remote to regional centres to metropolitan Sydney. They have broad-ranging experience and I am confident will identify and secure the most suitable candidates. I would expect the recruitment will commence in the second week of August for the General Manager and a month later for the Director, as it's important that the new General Manager is involved in the process. I have yet to determine the most appropriate way to ensure the community is involved in the recruitment interview process. At the June meeting, a report was presented on the council's manager structure that was deferred as I found the structure to be confusing. It was noted in that report that council was being consulted in relation to the matter, when in fact section 332 of the local government clearly states the opposite. A council must, after consulting with the General Manager, amongst other things, determine the roles and reporting lines of holders of senior staff positions and the resources to be allocated towards the employment of staff. This matter should have been relisted on the current agenda. However, time has not allowed me to form a view, accepting that it is not helped with the current situation of the council. Many staff are confused and it's impacting on morale, as is the so-called administration hub. I have asked the CEO to stop any more negotiations in relation to the latest restructure and now seek details and reports, including consultants and redundancy payments, on all restructures that have occurred since May 2016. The information required will take some time to put together, but is to be available for the Acting General Manager when he commences in August so that he can form a view and advise the new General Manager. To be clear, I'm not proposing that there be another wholesale restructure of the Council. My principal concern is the complexity of what appears to have happened since amalgamation. Another priority that will require a reference to the Acting General Manager is the deterioration in the Council's reserves and unrestricted cash position since the amalgamation of May 2016. A high-level report was made available to Council in December 2019 in relation to this matter that was simply received, when in my view it warranted the urgent attention of the elected body. The newly formed Council was obviously living beyond its means, and unsustainable financial decisions were made that have now dramatically affected the Council's cash position. In short, there's been a deterioration of available cash, being internal reserves and unrestricted cash, of around 70%, I repeat 70%, from the time of the merger to June 2018. Since that time, it appears to me that Council staff have worked to improve the cash position, but it remains tenuous with a poor outlook and is now being further negatively influenced by the continuing impact of COVID-19. These are matters that warrant detailed analysis, and I believe will provide many explanations for the criticism now being directed at Council for the lack of funds to finalise works underway and projected in the strategic plan. At the initial meeting following my appointment as Interim Administrator, I outlined a process for dealing confidentially to ensure people could discuss matters with me openly, so I could form a view to allow me to make an interim progress report that was required in my letter of appointment. I wish to thank the suspended and former councillors, staff both past and present, and the many residents and organisations who I have met with over the recent weeks. The time has now come for me to give notice that from Monday 3 August I will be supported by an executive assistant. However, as is the norm, any correspondence to me marked confidential will be treated accordingly. Of course, I'll also do my best to respond to phone calls as expeditiously as possible. The Land and Environment Court case is a matter that I must address, as in my view there is a clear public interest. The decision to commence proceedings were not taken in this chamber, and it is a matter that I have unfortunately inherited. From the information made available to me, all decisions of staff and the use of sub-delegations have been based on written legal advice, and whether that advice was correct or appropriate is for others to judge. The result of the case is clear, and for the record, the judgment of Chief Justice Preston, file number 2020/140210, will be attached to the minutes. Costs in the case have rightly attracted much community concern, and I have been advised that the Council's direct costs are $155,368, and they will be brought to account in the 2019-2020 financial statements. While the respondents' costs were awarded costs against the Council and the CEO, I can confirm that Council's insurers have advised that they will not seek to recover costs incurred in defending councillors for the matter raised by ARC. I'm advised again, on legal advice, that Council agreed to indemnify the costs of the CEO when she became the second applicant in respect of any orders made by the court. I'll be meeting with the insurers in early August to finalise this matter. The next ordinary meeting of Council is scheduled for 26 August, and I have an important family matter that means I must be in Sydney on that date. Accordingly, the meeting will be held on Wednesday 19 August at 4 p.m. I apologise for this rescheduling, but I have no alternative. When I took on this role, I indicated that I would act with honesty, openness and transparency. Every local authority has what I would describe as council watchers. But in my opinion, it's very important that the views of people who are not in the room are also taken into account. That is, the community generally. I've spoken to many people in my short time working with ARC community and have done my best to better understand how we now find ourselves in this situation. When the CEO decided to resign, some suspended councils thought that this was an end to the matter. In my view, that decision was the start, not the conclusion of restoring community trust in ARC. I have stated publicly that we need to rebuild also the confidence of the staff. I would never breach the trust of confidentiality that has led to so many residents making contact with me, and I have been told that I would never breach the trust of confidentiality so many residents have made contact with me, and what I have been told about suspended councillors and staff, both past and present. Some of what has been told to me is very disturbing, but it is the basis of my forming a preliminary view. The resignation of the former mayor, deputy mayor and 2 councillors has made my job all the more difficult. I've even been contacted by some suspended councillors and read in the press that their reinstatement should be expedited. The minutes of the meeting of council on 1 June clearly state that some suspended councillors do not acknowledge that their behaviours are not acceptable and that the community has lost respect in their elected representatives. In my view, this has not been helped by the actions of some staff members. The Local Government Act requires that I submit a report to the Minister for Local Government on any recommendations I may have to improving or restoring the proper or effective functioning of the council, and I'm still working on that report. Given my experience to date, I believe that the community needs nothing short of a fresh start, and not only with its General Manager. Clearly, the future of the council is in the hands of the Minister for Local Government, but in accordance with my already stated principles, I advise the ARC community that I will be requesting a 3-month extension to my appointment. I move that the advices be received and the actions outlined in this minute be endorsed, and declare that carried. We now move on to reports submitted by staff, and the first item is 9.1, resignation of councillors.
Mr Administrator, I'll introduce that report. It's a report acknowledging the resignation of councillors Gray, Witters and Martin, and of the Mayor Dr Murray, and acknowledging the service that they provided. It also attends to recommendation in relation to whether or not a by-election for those 4 positions should be held or not.
Thank you. I have concerns with this recommendation because I am not convinced that the Armidale Regional Council community will be best served by Part B of the recommendation. So I'm proposing to move Part A of the recommendation and not Part B. In relation to Part B, I would move defer a decision on whether to hold a by-election to elect 4 councillors to the 19 August meeting to take advice on the risk that full representative democracy is not served in the Armidale Regional Council local government area if the election is not held. Have you got that up? Okay, accordingly, in relation to this matter, on page 4, I move A as recommended by the staff, and Part B, which I have if you can put A with acknowledge the resignation, that council A, and then B will be defer a decision Thank you. I declare that carried. The next item is 9.2, Mayor and Councillor remuneration. That's the acknowledge the resignation of Councillors Gray, Martin and Ritters and Mayor Murray.
Sorry, B, the top B, dispense with the by-election and replace the vacancies caused by the resignation of Councillors Gray, Martin and Murray.
Where's that? Part B, defer decision to hold election of 4 councillors.
Yeah.
Not mentioned.
No.
Not necessary.
Okay. The very top B is missing winners.
But that doesn't matter. I didn't move that. That's okay. I didn't move that.
Should refer to by-election in the bottom line.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes. The council local government, if the by-election is not held. Okay, just for the record, I'll do that again then, put in the buy-in. A and B, and I declare that carried. The next item is remuneration, Mayor and Councillor remuneration.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. I'll introduce this report. Sections 248 and 249 of the Local Government Act require that councils fix and pay an annual fee based on to councillors for the following year. The Local Government Remuneration Tribunal has made a recommendation that fees not increase, but it has moved Armidale Regional Council into a different bracket. This report addresses the recommendation of fees payable to councillors for the following year and the mayoral allowance as well.
Thanks for that. I would move the recommendation on page 6 of the business papers, A, B and C, and declare that carried. Next item is planning proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. This is a report on a planning proposal for a property on the outskirts of Armidale, looking to rezone and to change the minimum lot size for a subdivision. The report is recommending not to proceed to Gateway and is presented to you for decision.
Thank you. I found this report very comprehensive, so if you could acknowledge that to the author. I would move on page 8 of the recommendation items A and B and declare that carried. Next item is tender for road resurfacing contract.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. So this is a report that talks about council working collaboratively with other councils to take to tender our resurfacing projects. The recommendation has been slightly amended that the contractor's order of preference be adopted as per the tender evaluation report for road servicing contract REG PRO 162021, with Part A that all tenderers have been retained on the panel to provide the resurfacing contract services across ARC, and B, that the tender evaluation report completed on the 17th of the 6th, 2020 remains confidential, and I will present that report for your consideration.
Is that new recommendation going to come onto the screen or? if you can just, sorry. If, no, after 21, if you can run, I would say 2021, comma, it being noted. Then flow on that all tenderers, it being noted, and just what A is there. May need some help. Look, I take responsibility for this. Those who attended the last meeting would note that I don't agree with dealing with too much in confidential counsel, including tenders, but it's important that the tender evaluations remain confidential. Unless that's noted in the recommendation, it doesn't occur. So it wasn't until later on this afternoon that I realised that the staff had run with what I was trying to do, but it was a difficult tender. It wasn't a simple, appoint A and B to build a bridge for X dollars. This is a lot of different tenderers doing a lot of different things with roads. I still don't agree. I think what you've got to do is that, near line 1, the contract does then be adopted. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
Just changing the very last thing.
No. Yeah. Yeah. That, then new line A. No. That A, you put that, then you drop it down, now drop down, that's A. So that becomes, sorry, contractors becomes A. No, that is 2 points, that one and that one. So that A, yeah, now drop it down over the line. Okay. No, that A's where it comes. Dot. And then what A dot. That's A there, you should go after it. Take that one out. If you noted that, and then all that goes, that line there goes up there. Correct. This will be a continuing process of improving how the minutes are done, and I apologise to the staff for causing some of these problems, but it's important that minutes are easy to read for the community. I would move A and B as on the screen there and declare that carried. Now, the next one is the interim hardship policy.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. Council previously endorsed an interim hardship policy that was due for review at the 30th of June 2020. The interim hardship policy basically is an extension of Council's existing hardship provisions, but basically covers arrangements for people who are facing hardship in relation or direct relation to the COVID-19 shutdown and the associated hardship caused by those provisions. In light of the number of ratepayers accessing the policy and changes to the interest on overdue rates and charges made by Office of Local Government, we reviewed the policy and recommend it be extended to the 30th of September 2020, with an amendment to recommend that Council accepts requests for hardship in relation to overdue rates and charges on the basis of meeting minimum payment arrangements. These minimum payment arrangements are outlined in the revised policy, and we're also recommending the extension of timeframe for the policy to remain in place.
Thank you. I would move the recommendation, the staff recommendation outlined on page 13 of the business paper and declare it carried. Next item is review of advisory committees in terms of reference.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. Introducing this report, firstly, I would like to draw attention to an inadvertent error that has crept into this report on page 16. There is a, is that correct? There is a figure in the penultimate paragraph there of 22,687. That figure is actually incorrect and it should be $42,149 per annum, which would be the maximum fees payable to ARIC committee members. I ask that the minutes correct the record in that regard, please.
Yes, in the minutes, not the business paper.
The report is in two parts. One, that the model terms of reference for advisory committees be accepted in its revised form, streamlining and hopefully creating efficiencies in the running of these committees, advisory committees. Secondly, there is a recommendation for the charter for the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee that following a meeting of that committee last night, I would suggest that the recommendation be altered slightly to read at item B, that Council B adopt the revised charter for the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, incorporating anticipated changes to the Local Government Act around ARIC committee functions, noting 1, the requirement for members to meet the New South Wales Government's pre-qualification scheme be waived until such time as legislative changes become mandatory, and 2, the Charter incorporates any resolution of Council in relation to fees payable to ARIC committee members. Present the report for consideration.
So you're suggesting that in effect the council adopts the new charter recommended by OLG?
It's a charter that's been prepared in accordance with OLG guidelines to anticipate the regulatory changes that will come into effect at a time as yet unknown.
So this accords with what was discussed at last night's meeting?
That's correct.
Thank you. Have we got that up? Okay, so when the minutes are finalised, you will have the officer's original recommendation, the fact that the officer noted there was an incorrect figure on page 16, and that as a result of last night's meeting and further discussion with the committee, that he was wanting to change here's item B. Okay. I also attended last night's meeting and was concerned at the fees payable to members and the workloads that will flow when the new charter is introduced in its entirety, and that will occur when it's in effect legislated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. But it is the hope, or it's certainly my hope while I'm here, that the Audit Committee will take on that extra burden pretty well straight away. And I think I made that pretty clear last night. Well, if that's the case, I want to add a D. I'm happy to move A, the amended B, and C, but I also want to add D, which I gave to you earlier, and that is that Council D calls for a report to be presented to the September meeting that, in line with the recommendations of the New South Wales Government discussion paper, a new risk management and internal audit framework dated September 2019, Council considers the stepped introduction of appropriate fees to be paid to ARC committee members, and that in the meantime fees be increased to $500 per member per meeting, effective immediately.
For the record of part 2, that's ARIC, A-R-I-C, as opposed to ARC, not to be confused with Regional Council.
Okay, I would then move, as up on the screen, A from page 14 of the business paper, the new B that was introduced by the officer, C on the business paper, and D as it is on the screen, and declare that carried. Next item is New England Weeds Authority minutes.
Again, Mr Administrator, I present the February and April minutes of the New England Weeds Authority for notice.
I actually attended a meeting in June. Have those minutes come through yet, or?
I haven't seen those ones.
Okay. I would move the recommendation outlined on page 17 of the business paper and declare that carried. Next item, cash and investment report.
Thank you. The cash and investment report is an administrative report. It's required to be provided to Council monthly under the Local Government Act requirements. The report outlines the total cash held as at the 30th of June 2020, where the funds were invested and whether the investment portfolio is in accordance with the investment policy. And the report recommends the information on cash and investments be noted in the report.
I would move the recommendation outlined on page 18 of the business paper and declare it carried. Next item, 1313, quarterly water report.
The quarterly water adjustment report is similarly administrative in nature. It identifies the water usage that's been written off in accordance with Council's water account adjustment management policy. This policy allows for write-offs of water usage that result from undetectable leaks. and the report recommends the information on the water adjustments made under the policy be noted.
I haven't discussed this with anyone, but is this a statutory requirement or is it just something the council likes?
It's not my understanding it's a statutory requirement, it is a council policy. So it caters for situations where customers may end up with very high bills because there has been an undetectable leak present on the property, and gives them an avenue to provide evidence to us to demonstrate that they were unaware of that and get relief under the policy.
I might have a closer look at that if I'm here longer. I would move the recommendation on page 20 of the business paper and declare that carried. Next item is 13.4, level 5 water restrictions.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. This report is for noting that the Armidale LGA is still in level 5 water restrictions as a result of the drought conditions and the lowest ever recorded rainfall across the LGA in 130 years of recording that data, and acknowledges that the current water storage capacities across the LGA are just 10% above where they were at the same period last year, and the BOM outlook is not very favourable for a good outlook for our rainfall. So the reports are noting that the restrictions remain in place.
Thank you. This is the matter the two gentlemen spoke on. I agree with their view that this is a matter that should be determined at the council level, not an operational issue. But having said that, I think you'd be a brave councillor or administrator to go against professional advice in relation to such an important issue to the community generally. So I would move this recommendation, adding after the words council utility personnel, the words for report to council. I declare that carried, and we're on the same page. The next item is 16.1, the minutes of the Regional Growth and Place Activation Committee.
Thank you, Administrator. This is for noting that the minutes of the Regional Growth and Place Activation Peak Advisory Committee was held on the 9th of July, and those minutes be noted.
Thank you. In relation to this matter, I would move the recommendation outlined on page 24 of the business paper and declare it carried. Next item is the Traffic Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. Excuse me. From the Traffic Advisory Committee, the following recommendations. A, that the minutes of the Traffic Advisory Committee meeting held via email for the 7th of July 2020 be noted and endorsed. B, that a no stopping zone be installed on the eastern side of Taylor Street across the entry-exit of Newling Gardens. C, that a no parking zone be installed on the northern side of Beardy Street in front of the West End service station for the length of 44 metres. D, that a no stopping zone be installed on the southern side of Beardy Street in front of the West End service station for the length of 40 metres. E, the new BB centre line to extend from the intersection of Beardy and Golgotha Street to Phyllis Crescent. I move there be adopted.
Thanks for that. With Traffic Advisory Committee, are there councillors on that committee?
There were, Mr Interim Administrator, the Deputy Mayor was the last chair from my recollection. There aren't any, of course, at the moment.
But there's police and other representatives on it?
Yep. Transport for New South Wales.
I'm just interested as to why some of these truly operational matters, in my view, come to the council. There's obviously important issues that go through the Traffic Committee, that have to come to the council. But no stopping zones are obviously influenced by the police.
The history of it shows people accessing those service stations, stopping in the middle of the road and
I'm not
gesturing.
just talking generally though about, they're influenced by the police, not by the council.
Could come from the community, it could
Okay.
come from a business.
All right, okay, well, I think it's valid that it stays as it is. I would move on page 25, recommendations A, B, C, D and E, as on a business paper, and declare them carried. The next item relates to the minutes of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, obviously not the one held last night.
Not the one held last night, Mr Administrator. These are minutes of the fire main meeting presented for notation.
Okay, I would move the recommendation outlined on page 26 of the business paper, that the minutes of the Audit Committee be adopted and declare that carried. The next matter is listed to be held in closed committee. That is a closed council. That is the notice of motion in relation to employment matters. I don't deem this to be a closed council matter. It's a public interest matter. So we can deal with it at the council level. I don't intend to move the recommendation, so it will lapse. Are there any urgent matters? I would declare the meeting closed. Thank you.